Hello, could you help me grow this channel? Subscribing is totally free. Just one click below this video is all it takes.
At my own birthday dinner, sitting at the far end of a long walnut table, surrounded by people who shared my blood but never quite seemed to understand me, my father leaned back in his chair with that same smug grin he'd worn since I was old enough to recognize condescension, and chuckled in that low, gravelly tone that always felt more like a judgment than a joke. His fingers drummed casually against his glass of bourbon as he announced to the whole table, like it was some kind of roast, "Your sister just got promoted, senior vice president no less. And you're still doing that little job or whatever it is?" The room echoed with forced laughter, the kind that people use when they don't know whether to agree or look away. My mother smiled politely, like she always does, the kind of smile that's meant to keep peace but never actually fixes anything. My brother-in-law let out a polite laugh, already reaching for the breadbasket like nothing just happened. And Samantha, my sister, the golden girl, the eternal favorite, she just sipped her wine and gave that closed-lipped smirk that always said, "Poor you," without needing a single word. I didn't flinch. I didn't offer some weak, self-deprecating chuckle or try to change the subject like I had done at so many family dinners before. Instead, I took a long sip of my drink, Cabernet, full-bodied, just like the moment, and when I placed the glass back on the table, I looked straight at him, dead center in those faded blue eyes, and said evenly, "Funny, she works for me now." I swear you could feel the oxygen leave the room. It wasn't silence, it was vacuum. Even the clinking of silverware stopped, like the table itself was holding its breath. Samantha froze mid-sip, her glass hovering just below her bottom lip, and for the first time in what felt like decades, my father didn't have anything clever to say. He just stared at me as if trying to replay the sentence in his head, searching for sarcasm, for some kind of joke he'd missed. But there was none. There was only truth, hanging there like a chandelier about to crash down. And just like that, the whole illusion shattered. The illusion that Samantha was untouchable. The illusion that I was somehow the lesser one, the quieter one, the one who never quite made it. The illusion that my success had to be small because it didn't come with a title they recognized or a plaque they could hang in the hallway. You know, birthdays used to be hard for me, not because of aging or milestones, but because they always turned into subtle reminders of who I wasn't. I wasn't the daughter who made honor roll every semester. I wasn't the one who got into Yale, or brought home framed certificates, or stood behind a podium making the family name look important. I was the daughter who chose a different road, one that looked, for a long time, like it led nowhere. But I've learned something about the roads that nobody else takes. They're quieter, yes, and they're lonelier, but if you walk them long enough, you start building something real. Something that doesn't need clapping relatives or shiny frames on a wall. I built a company from the ground up. No investor daddy, no cushy recommendations, no inherited anything. Just me, a laptop, and the willingness to be underestimated. And now here we were, at a table where, for once, I wasn't playing the part of the underachiever. I had taken their expectations, stuffed them in a drawer, and gone out into the world to prove, to myself more than anyone, that I didn't need their applause to win. Samantha blinked first. Of course she did. She slowly set her glass down, her expression somewhere between confusion and irritation, like someone just told her the punchline to a joke she didn't find funny. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice sharper than she probably meant it to be. "I'm talking about the fact," I said calmly, almost too calmly, "that the company you started working for last month, the one with the sleek office downtown, the one you keep saying is so innovative and forward-thinking, I built it, I own it, and technically I sign your paychecks." And still, silence. Stillness. The only sound in the room was the low hum of the central air. Let me ask you something. Have you ever had a moment where your entire life flips? Not with fireworks or screaming or public humiliation, but with the quiet drop of a single, undeniable truth? Because that was this. No yelling, no slamming fists on tables, just the cold, hard reversal of power, and the delicious awkwardness that followed. Do you think I was wrong not to tell them earlier? Do you think I owed them the truth about who I was becoming before they kept on belittling who I used to be? Let me know in the comments. I've heard it all before. But I'm curious what you think now. My father tried to gather his words, stammering something about how that couldn't be true, how I never mentioned anything about running a company. And he was right, I never did, because they never asked, because they weren't listening. But I had been watching and waiting, not for revenge, not exactly, just for balance. And now that it had arrived, I wasn't going to gloat. I was going to let them sit in the silence they so often filled with noise, about how great Samantha was and how I was still figuring things out. That night, I didn't need candles on the cake. The real celebration was already flickering in the stunned expressions around me. And believe me, the party was just getting started. Growing up in the Taylor household meant learning early how to stay invisible while sitting in the same room as your own family. And for as long as I can remember, I was the quiet backdrop to Samantha's spotlight. The girl who read books while others clapped for someone else. The one who brought home decent grades and never caused trouble, but never earned applause either. Not because I wasn't good, but because I wasn't the kind of good they could brag about over barbecue or at the office Christmas party. Samantha, 2 years older, was always the achiever, the pageant-ready prodigy who got the right internships, made the right friends, dated the right boys, and later climbed the corporate ladder with the same ease with which she once twirled on stage in sequin dresses for county pageants. While my mother smiled so hard her cheeks trembled, and my dad filmed every second like it was the Super Bowl. I was never bitter, not exactly, but I learned early that no matter how hard I worked, no one would be framing my spelling bee certificates or attending the end-of-year art show where I quietly displayed pieces that had taken me weeks to finish. And somewhere along the way, I stopped trying to match her pace and started creating a rhythm of my own. Slower maybe, less public, but mine. It started small, an interest in coding, some freelance design work, late nights in my dorm room teaching myself how to build apps instead of going to parties or joining sororities like Samantha did. I didn't announce things because nobody was asking, and over time I realized that silence could be a kind of power. Not the kind you wield loudly, but the kind that lets you move without being watched, build without being doubted, and ultimately succeed without being seen until it's too late for them to rewrite the story. College was different because it was the first place where nobody knew my last name, and it was there that I tasted the freedom of being judged by my work instead of my family's expectations. I remember one night in particular, sophomore year, when a professor pulled me aside after class and told me my project could actually be something real, something that could make money and maybe even change things. And I walked back to my apartment with my laptop under one arm and a burning in my chest that I couldn't name at the time, only to realize years later that it was the first time I'd felt seen. But when I came home for the holidays and tried to talk about it, about the app I was building, the prototype I'd coded from scratch, my dad barely looked up from the football game, muttering something like, "Sounds techie," while Samantha jumped in to say her firm had just launched a new CRM platform and how exciting it was to be part of a real company. That phrase stuck with me, a real company, because what she meant, and what my dad repeated later at dinner, was that I was playing around while she was doing something important, something respectable. And it didn't matter that by then, I was already making enough freelancing to pay my tuition. It didn't matter that I'd turned down a paid internship to keep working on my own ideas. What mattered to them was the name on the business card, the logo on the laptop, the office with floor-to-ceiling windows where Samantha could be photographed in pencil skirts, looking competent and confident, while I was building something they couldn't see and therefore didn't believe in. So I stopped trying to explain. I graduated quietly, skipped the family dinner afterward, and moved into a tiny apartment with bad plumbing and great Wi-Fi where I stayed up most nights refining code, making cold calls, and failing again and again. until finally, I wasn't failing anymore. The first time a real client wired me $50,000 for a custom platform, I sat on the floor of my one-bedroom apartment in complete silence, staring at the screen while my hands trembled. Not because I doubted I could do it, but because it was the first time the world had confirmed what I had always tried to tell my family. I was capable. Not cute smart, not sweet creative, not good with computers, but capable in a way that made people put their money where their mouths were. Still, I didn't tell anyone. Not when I got my first round of angel investment, not when I hired my first employee, not even when I signed the lease for our office space in the city and bought myself a used BMW, because the same voice that had been embedded in my head for years, the voice of never enough, kept whispering that until they said I mattered. Maybe I didn't. I kept my head down and worked, building the kind of business that doesn't make headlines but pays everyone on time. The kind that gets referred through whispers in investor circles and grows slowly, steadily, like a tree in a quiet forest. And through it all, I watched Samantha from a distance. Her LinkedIn posts, her awards, her articles in women in business blogs, and I didn't envy her. I just wondered what it would feel like if, for once, she had to walk into a room where I was the one holding the power. That thought never left me, not because I needed revenge in the theatrical sense, but because I wanted recognition. Not from the world, but from the people who once sat across from me at a dinner table and saw someone small. And when the opportunity came to hire Samantha, when her resume landed on my recruiter's desk with a note about her recent layoff and her reputation for leadership, I didn't laugh, I didn't delete it, I told HR to bring her in. And I said nothing, not to them, not to her, not even to myself, as I signed the paperwork. Because the moment wasn't about ego, it was about symmetry. And now, as I sit here remembering how it all started, how she was always first, always best, always right, I know exactly how we got to that birthday dinner. I didn't crash into success. I built it, brick by brick, silent, slow, and undeniable. And now, she works for me. She doesn't even know it yet. But she will very soon. There's something strangely satisfying, haunting even, about watching someone walk into a room they've never entered before and not realizing that everything about it was built by the very person they used to underestimate. And when Samantha stepped through the doors of my company's downtown office, crisp blazer on, hair tied back in that calculatedly effortless way she always wore during interviews, she didn't look around with any real curiosity or humility. Because people like her, raised on applause and built up by endless validation, don't walk into a place assuming they might be walking into someone else's domain. They assume it belongs to someone important, sure, but certainly not someone they once called overly sensitive or kinda artsy, but not really business-minded. It had all happened with perfect, almost suspicious ease, as if fate itself had finally grown tired of the years I'd spent biting my tongue while praise and promotions rained down on Samantha like confetti at a parade, and decided it was time to pull back the curtain just a little. A wave of layoffs had swept through her previous company, massive restructuring, executive decisions from above, and despite her title and her bravado, she was suddenly just another strategic asset being repositioned right out the front door. The LinkedIn post came first, something about embracing new opportunities and being grateful for the journey, the kind of spin professionals use when they're trying to keep their dignity intact, followed by a series of likes, hearts, and "you got this, girl" comments from a network that applauds loyalty but never offers real lifelines. A week later, her resume slid across my desk, metaphorically at first, as an internal Slack message from our lead recruiter who said, "Strong background, big network, but a little too polished. Still, might be worth an interview." I didn't say anything. I didn't reveal that I recognized the name. I didn't even blink. I just typed, "Schedule her, entry-level strategy position. Let's see if she can handle the work." Because that was the thing. Samantha had always performed best on a stage, under lights, in front of an audience that wanted to believe in her excellence. But my company wasn't a stage. It was a factory of innovation, a grindhouse of collaboration, a place where good ideas could come from interns, and criticism wasn't a personal attack, but a path to refinement. I had built it deliberately that way because I knew what it felt like to work in places where loud confidence trumped actual value. The interview, from what I later gathered, went well enough. She answered questions smoothly, had all the right buzzwords, and presented herself as someone hungry for new challenges, eager to contribute. Nobody recognized her last name because most of my team came from outside the polished circles Samantha had floated in for years, and I had made sure of that. I didn't want a company filled with clones of people who'd never been overlooked. I wanted the overlooked. I wanted the underestimated. And now Samantha was one of them, without knowing it. The offer went out within days. She accepted quickly, no counter, no hesitation, just gratitude, masked in professional cheerfulness, and a signed contract that made her an employee like anyone else, subject to the same reviews, the same expectations, the same chain of command, the same me. I didn't meet her in person that first week, though I was in the office, of course. I passed her once in the hallway, kept my head slightly turned, stayed in conversation with another manager, watched from the corner of my eye as she walked past, with a new employee smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She didn't recognize me. I didn't expect her to. I looked different, older, sharper, more put together than the little sister she probably still pictured in hoodies and anxiety, quietly existing in the background of family dinners. She settled in quickly, throwing herself into projects, impressing some of the younger team members with her polish, irritating others with her tendency to dominate meetings and take credit for collaborative work. But I let it go for now because I wasn't interested in punishing her. I was interested in watching her operate inside a space she didn't know I controlled, a world I had built to reward merit and expose pretense. And then came the day, the moment I knew had to come eventually, when she was called into a meeting to present strategy updates to executive leadership. She walked in, portfolio in hand, with that same strut she used to walk into our house during the holidays, after closing a deal or getting a promotion, expecting admiration and maybe a little jealousy. But this time, as she looked around the room to greet the panel, her eyes landed on me, and I saw it, that flicker, that split second where her confidence cracked. Just a hairline fracture, as if her brain was trying to reconcile what her eyes were seeing with what she knew to be true. And then came the smile, forced, brief, unsure. "Jessica," she said, her voice pitched a little too high, her eyes scanning the room for confirmation. I smiled, not wide, not smug, just enough to let her know she wasn't mistaken. "Good morning," I said, and gestured toward the chair opposite me. "Let's hear your plan." She sat down slowly, still reeling, probably cycling through every family event, every phone call, every dinner where I'd said nothing about the company I'd built, the team I'd assembled, the empire she had now entered as a foot soldier. And in that moment, I didn't feel powerful. I felt calm, steady, like everything was finally settling where it belonged. She did well enough in the meeting. Nothing brilliant, nothing disastrous. She stumbled once, recovered, offered a few recycled insights that might have flown in her old firm, but didn't impress this room. I nodded occasionally, took notes, said thank you at the end, and as the others left, she lingered, hovering by the door. "You run this?" she asked, finally. "I do," I replied simply. And then I left, because there was no need for a speech, no need to explain how she got there. She was here now, and that was enough. And still, I hadn't told anyone in the family. Not because I was hiding, but because the most satisfying kind of revenge doesn't arrive with fanfare. It arrives in silence, with a polite smile and a meeting invite that changes everything. There's a particular kind of satisfaction that comes not from revenge itself, but from the quiet steadiness of control, from knowing that you're no longer the person twisting yourself into knots to earn validation from people who were never really listening. And as I watched Samantha move through her first weeks at my company, navigating tasks that were well within her capabilities, but void of the high-polished praise she had grown so used to. I began to realize that the true power of the moment wasn't in humiliating her, but in doing absolutely nothing to protect her ego. Because for once, it wasn't my job to cushion her from consequences. Nor did I feel the need to announce that the rules were different here, because the rules had always been different in the world I'd built. And if anything, it was time she learned what life looked like outside the pedestal. She didn't know how to adapt at first, not really. There were moments when she clearly expected her charm to carry her, like during one project kickoff, when she launched into a rapid-fire monologue about branding strategies and legacy positioning, the kind of corporate poetry she'd used to great effect in her previous role, only to be met with polite, uninterested nods from my team, who cared far more about results than rhetoric. I could see the discomfort creep across her face like a slow burn, not because anyone was being hostile, but because for the first time in a long while, she wasn't being applauded just for showing up. She was being asked to prove something. I didn't intervene. I didn't pull her aside or offer back-channel coaching or remind her that, unlike in our family, here she had to stand on merit alone. Instead, I sat through meetings, reviewed her performance the same way I reviewed anyone else's, direct, honest, constructive, and without the layer of familial hesitation that might have once softened my words. And she noticed. Of course she did. Samantha had always been sharp in the way that performers are, keenly attuned to audience reaction, quick to adjust, but less comfortable when the spotlight flickered or turned cold. She began second-guessing herself, asking more questions, seeking feedback more frequently, and I could tell it grated on her to have to humble herself, to have to admit she didn't automatically understand the dynamics of a place where her last name carried no weight. Back home, though, the charade continued. Family dinners were rare, but when they happened, she resumed the role of the favorite without hesitation. My father would ask how work was going, and she'd toss out phrases like fast-paced, exciting challenges, and working under brilliant leadership, without once letting the truth slip, and I let her have it. Not because I was afraid, but because I was curious how long she could keep performing while living a version of reality that had already outgrown her narrative. And of course, my father lapped it up. He'd nod approvingly, maybe throw in a story about how Samantha used to organize her toys alphabetically as a kid, always the planner, that one. While I sat at the other end of the table, sipping wine, biting my tongue, watching history repeat itself with the same exhausting precision it always had. Except this time, the script was flipped, and nobody knew it but me. There was one night in particular, late, quiet, just the two of us left in the office after a long day of meetings and project reviews, when she finally cracked just a little. She lingered by my door, awkward and fidgety, in a way I'd never seen before, and after a moment she asked if she could come in. I nodded, didn't say much, just motioned toward the chair across from me, and she sat down, looked around the room as if taking it in for the first time, like she was finally starting to see the details. The books on the shelf, the handwritten notes pinned to the wall, the plaques she'd never known existed because they weren't the kind that got posted on Facebook. I didn't realize, she started, voice low, careful, that this was yours. I mean, I knew you worked in tech, but I didn't know it was like this. And there it was, the closest thing I was going to get to an apology, to acknowledgement, to that moment I used to fantasize about when I was younger. Back when I believed that if I worked hard enough, succeeded big enough, they'd have to see me. But I didn't gloat. I didn't even answer right away. I just watched her for a few seconds and said, "A lot of people didn't." She nodded slowly, and for a brief second, I saw something in her that resembled vulnerability, raw, unguarded, like a person trying to find footing on terrain she thought she'd already mastered. It wasn't pity I felt. It wasn't triumph. It was clarity. Samantha was never the villain. She was just a product of a system that always favored the one who fit best into the mold. And for years, I'd let that dynamic define me, measure me, diminish me, but not anymore. The next morning, nothing changed. She came to work, attended meetings, submitted reports, did her job. But something in her demeanor had shifted. Less performative, more measured. I wasn't sure if it was respect or discomfort, but it didn't matter. The balance had been restored, even if no one else could see the scale. And so I waited. I waited for the right moment. Not to expose her, but to let the truth hang in the air so publicly, so undeniably, that no one at that dinner table would ever again confuse the roles we were born into with the ones we had grown into. The moment was coming, and when it arrived, it wouldn't be loud. It would be exact, precise, final. Because control, I'd learned, doesn't always come from power plays and shouting matches. Sometimes, control looks like sitting quietly across from your older sister while she answers to your expectations, not the other way around. The night of the dinner, my birthday, though it barely felt like one, arrived with the usual mixture of forced cheer and the subtle undercurrent of judgment that had shadowed every family gathering I could remember. And as I walked into the restaurant, the kind of upscale place my father chose to impress more than enjoy, I already knew how the evening would unfold before it even began. Because we'd done this dance before, countless times over the years, where Samantha would show up glowing with curated success. My father would beam with pride that bordered on worship. My mother would smooth over any tension with polite smiles and too many appetizers, and I would sit there, year after year, playing the role of the quieter one, the one who hadn't quite made it, the one still finding her way, no matter how far along the road I'd traveled without them noticing. They were all there when I arrived, already seated, already sipping wine, already halfway through a conversation I wasn't invited into. And as I slid into my chair across from Samantha, who was laughing softly at something my father had just said, I felt the weight of years pressing against my ribs. The years I had spent chasing their attention, their validation, their casual acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, I was worth noticing in the same breath as she was. But tonight, I wasn't chasing anything. I had nothing to prove, nothing left to hide, and nothing but time to let them walk right into the truth I had been holding, like a loaded weapon behind my teeth. Dinner moved in its usual predictable rhythm. My father ordered for everyone, as if we were still children incapable of reading menus. My mother asked about Samantha's latest corporate adventures with a glazed expression of admiration, as if listening to a documentary about royalty. Samantha, for her part, did what she always did, recited her professional highlights with an effortless mix of confidence and humble bragging that landed exactly the way she intended it to, as if each word were a polished gem handed over for display. I let her talk, I nodded occasionally. I even smiled once or twice, not because I was being polite, but because watching her perform in ignorance, not knowing that the audience she was trying to impress was actually seated directly across from her in full control of the stage, was something I hadn't realized could feel so poetic. And then came the moment. It was casual, offhand, like all his dismissive comments had always been, wrapped in humor, seasoned with condescension, and tossed out like a bone he expected me to gratefully gnaw on. My father leaned back in his chair, swirling his bourbon, and said with that familiar chuckle, "So your sister just got promoted again. Senior VP this time. Impressive, right? And Jess, you're still doing that little tech thing, right?" He didn't mean harm, not in the way cruel people do. He just meant to remind everyone of the order of things. That Samantha was still the sun, and I was still orbiting somewhere out of sight. I didn't flinch. I didn't force a laugh or change the subject. I didn't even look at Samantha, who was now delicately dabbing the corner of her mouth with a napkin, her eyes flicking toward me with something that might have been pity or boredom. It didn't matter. I took a slow sip of my wine, set the glass down with care, and with a calm I didn't need to fake, I looked straight at my father and said, "Funny, she works for me now." Silence. Real silence. Not the kind where people are pausing between bites or waiting for dessert to arrive, but the thick, aching silence that spreads like smoke across a room when someone accidentally knocks over a candle and nobody moves because they're still trying to process what just happened. My father blinked. My mother's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Samantha's head tilted just slightly, like a dog trying to understand a word it had heard before but couldn't quite place. The waitress approached the table with a smile, ready to take orders, and backed away almost instantly, sensing the weight in the air like a storm about to crack open. For a long, breathless moment, nobody said a word. Then finally Samantha spoke, her voice tight, wrapped in the last threads of control she had left. "What are you talking about?" she asked, almost laughing, like I'd made a joke that wasn't quite landing. I turned slightly in my seat, resting my arms on the table, and met her gaze with all the composure I'd cultivated through every overlooked milestone and every unspoken accomplishment. "You started at a new firm last month," I said, slowly, deliberately. "The one you keep talking about. The innovative one with the modern leadership and the great culture. That's my company. I founded it. I run it. You work for me." There it was, not gloating, not a speech, just the facts, laid bare, undeniable. Samantha's face didn't crumble, not exactly, but something in her eyes dimmed, and her mouth opened slightly, like she might protest, might challenge the reality, until she realized there was no escape hatch from this truth, no alternate version where she could spin it back into her favor. My father looked stunned, his lips parted as if halfway through forming a word he'd forgotten. My mother, always the mediator, reached for her wine glass and sipped with trembling fingers, not because she disapproved, but because she had no script for this moment, no precedent to guide her through the realization that the family roles had shifted while she wasn't looking. I didn't say anything else. I didn't need to. I let them sit with it, let them chew it slowly like a piece of overcooked steak. Let the years of minimization and dismissal and quiet invisibility stack themselves like stones on their conscience while I watched. Calm, patient, not angry anymore. Just present. Fully, unmistakably present. Samantha didn't speak again for the rest of the meal. My father attempted a few shallow stabs at conversation, redirected towards sports or traffic or anything that could bring the temperature back down. But it was useless. The balance had tipped. The illusion had broken. And no matter how many times they tried to glue the pieces back together, they would never unhear what I had said. When the check came, I paid it. Quietly, no ceremony. We stood to leave, coats gathered, hugs exchanged with awkward hesitance. And as we stepped out into the cool night air, Samantha turned toward me as if she wanted to say something, anything, but instead, she just nodded once and walked toward her car. That was it. No apology, no confrontation, no tearful reckoning or sisterly embrace. Just silence. And for once, the satisfying sound of it belonging to me.